Welcome to this live community workshop meeting about redistricting. We're here to provide information and answer questions so you can help draw the new council districts. We're live on Facebook, YouTube, and Glendale 11. For those who cannot watch right now or be at one of our meetings in person, we'll be posting a recording of this meeting on our dedicated website page, www.glendaleaz.com/redistricting. That website page also lists all 3 of our community meetings. Our next meeting is September 22nd at 10 o'clock a.m. at Glendale's main library auditorium. And there's an evening meeting on September 27th at 6:30 at the Foothills Recreation and Aquatic Center. We're holding these meetings because we want input on proposed district maps, and all input matters in this process. Your participation can lead to a more transparent and representative experience for all those who call Glendale home. If you're watching and you have questions, but you're not here in person, we are monitoring our city's Facebook feed, facebook.com/GlendaleAZ, for your questions, and we will provide answers live during this meeting. And good afternoon, everyone. We are live today in our City Council chambers in downtown Phoenix. My name is Sue Bredding. I am with the Department of Public Affairs, and I am very pleased to introduce our panel of experts that we have with us today. They will be making a presentation. They will be answering questions as long as is needed. First, from the National Demographics Corporation, we have joining us via Zoom Douglas Johnson. And also from the National Demographics Corporation, and here in our council chambers today, is Ivy Beller-Sikansky. I would also like to introduce the members of our city clerk's office. They are supporting this redistricting effort. And they're our city clerk, Julie Bauer, our deputy city clerk, Cheryl Rabin, and also our clerk's office management assistant, Marcela Moreno. And to start this meeting off, we have a video for you. First, the video will play in English, and then it will play in Spanish.
As Glendale grows, neighborhoods shift, communities change. It's why Glendale is required to redraw city council district lines every 10 years, based on U.S. Census data. These new lines will determine who can represent you on the Glendale City Council. By redistricting, we make sure each district has roughly the same population, so residents have equal representation. Glendale grew by around 22,000 people since the 2010 census, with 6 council districts and a current population of more than 248,000. Each district needs to have about 41,000 people. The map must comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act, build districts that are geographically compact with connected boundaries, and try to keep communities of interest together. We need your help to make sure your community stays together. It's why the city is collecting public comments and inviting residents to suggest their own district boundaries. You can find more information and get involved at glendaleaz.com/redistricting.
A medida que Glendale crece, los vecindarios y las comunidades cambian. Es por esto que a Glendale se le pide que vuelva a trazar los límites de los distritos del Consejo de la Ciudad cada 10 años, basado en los datos del censo. Estos nuevos límites determinarán quién puede representar sus intereses en el Consejo de la Ciudad. A través de la redistribución de distritos, nos aseguramos de que cada distrito tenga aproximadamente la misma población, de manera que los residentes tengan igual representación. Desde el censo del año 2010, la población en Glendale ha tenido un aumento de alrededor de 22,000 habitantes. Con 6 distritos del Consejo y una población actual de más de 248,000 habitantes, cada distrito debe tener alrededor de 41,000 personas. El mapa debe cumplir con la Ley Federal de Derechos Electorales, la cual establece que se deben crear distritos geográficamente compactos con límites conectados y se debe intentar mantener juntas las diversas comunidades de interés. Necesitamos su ayuda para asegurarnos de que su comunidad permanezca unida. Es por esto que la municipalidad está recopilando comentarios del público e invitando a los residentes a que sugieran los límites deseados para su distrito. Visite la página web glendaleaz.com/redistricting para obtener más información y participar.
And next, Doug Johnson from the National Demographics Corporation has some more detailed information for you. Again, he's joining us via Zoom. Thank you, Doug.
Sorry, got to unmute. Still forget that. So thank you. It's a pleasure to be with all of you, and looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this important process for the city's elections for the next 10 years. I think, Ivy, do you have the presentation? Or should I share it from my computer?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Is it easier if Ivy shows it, or should I share it from here?
Can you see the screen? Can you see my screen?
Can the audience see it? Is the question. Let me see here. I could probably just share from here if that's easier.
Sure.
Okay. There we go. Okay, can you see the presentation on your screen?
Yes.
Yes, excellent. Okay. So let me jump right in here. On the timing, we kicked off, obviously, some of you may be aware, we had an initial workshop with the council talking about the current districts and their numbers. And then this is the first of 3 workshops where we'll be looking for community feedback on the draft maps. This is the first public discussion about the draft maps. They have not been through council review or anything like that. So this is your first chance to get in on the ground floor. After these community workshops, then it'll move over to the council deliberations with meetings on October 12th and November 9th, all building towards council adoption scheduled for November 23rd. This is a fairly fast process, but this is all because COVID delayed the census data so much that we're jumping in now and have to get this done, obviously, in time for the next election. And the county has asked that jurisdictions turn in their maps for next year's election by December 15th. When we're talking about the rules for how the maps have to be redrawn, there are really 3 different considerations. The first, as you see up in the top left, is our federal laws. These are absolute requirements. So we have to have essentially equal population in each district. You can modify that by a couple of percentage points to try to keep a neighborhood together and for various reasons that I'll talk about in a moment. But really, it's a very strict requirement. We also have to comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act. Folks who followed this process 10 years ago may know that there were 2 parts to the Federal Voting Rights Act. There was Section 2 and Section 5. And if you followed the law of the last 10 years, Section 5 is no longer in place for Glendale's redistricting, but we still have Section 2 of the Federal Voting Rights Act, which really says that if there's a neighborhood that is heavily made up of what the law calls a protected class, and in Glendale, we're really talking about Latinos, so the one, it could also be African Americans, Native Americans, or Asian American. But really, we're talking about if there's a neighborhood that's heavily made up of Latino population, that neighborhood cannot be divided in a way that dilutes their voting strength. There's a lot more to it, obviously, but that's a pretty good rule of thumb to follow. At the same time, federal law bans racial gerrymandering. So race can be a factor. Obviously, as I was talking about the Federal Voting Rights Act, it's something we consider, but it cannot be what the Supreme Court has termed the predominant factor. So we want to focus on neighborhoods and pay attention to the Voting Rights Act, where we have neighborhoods that are heavily protected class, but the neighborhoods are still the predominant factor when we're looking at this analysis. Then we have the Arizona statute, which largely mirrors the federal law in terms of equal population, and then also states kind of a generally known redistricting rule that puts it into statute, making sure that the districts are contiguous, that all the parts of the district touch the other parts of the district, and in as compact a form as possible. So those are our statutes and our requirements. Then on the right, you see our traditional redistricting principles. These are really goals, and these are things that the courts have considered and approved of as legitimate considerations in this process. So they're not requirements, but they are traditional things that jurisdictions look to achieve when redrawing their lines. So first of all is communities of interest. Could be a neighborhood or whatever else one thinks about. Then we want to try to keep the lines compact and contiguous and to follow visible boundaries wherever possible. Those are largely for the voters. Obviously, compactness is part of and contiguous is part of the Arizona statute. And it also makes sense on this side. And we want to follow major borders so it's easy for people to tell where their boundaries are. If someone wants to go knock on doors for if they like, we want it to be easy for them to know which doors to knock on and not have to figure it out block by block, if we can avoid that. Again, the equal population requirement is pretty strict. So that does sometimes lead to not being able to follow the easily understood boundaries. Other considerations that can be taken into account include respecting the voters' choices, in what the law sometimes calls continuity in office. This is trying to avoid pairing council members so that the re-election decisions are up to the voters. If each council member is a separate seat, then the voters get to decide who has earned re-election, versus the lines telling them it doesn't matter if you like both these council members, you can't re-elect both of them. Again, that's a traditional principle and a common goal, not a legal requirement. Then you can also underpopulate by a couple of percent. You can use that percentage I mentioned, deviation, to offset planned future growth to a very limited degree, of course. And you can also look at trying to minimize how many voters are shifted to different election years. If someone's in a district that's going to vote in 2022, we may want to minimize how many of them get postponed by moving them into a 2024 seat. A little bit of that is kind of unavoidable in most redistricting, but you can try to minimize it. And then the last traditional redistricting principle is preserving the core of existing areas. Where possible within the other requirements, you are allowed to try to keep the districts as close to what they are today as possible, so that the voters who have organized and walked precincts and worked with their neighbors to achieve goals and to be involved in past elections can still work together, and we don't disrupt those relationships. We talked about the Voting Rights Act in areas that are heavily one protected class. This map shows the current council district lines and the percentage of the citizen voting age population, that's CVAP, that are Latino in each, or that are estimated to be Latino in each city block, really. You can tell as it is what's called a heat map. So the blues and purples are the lowest, less than 50%. And then the greens are just over 50%, yellow and red are heavily Latino majority among citizen voting age population. So you can really see the kind of the Ocotillo area growing a bit to the east in the Cactus and a little bit to the southwest into Yucca. Obviously, there are a couple of big red census blocks over in the west out by the Air Force Base. Those are very, very low population blocks. So even though they look like they're heavily Latino, if there's only 3 or 4 people in them, they're not going to influence the demographics of the district. What we're really looking at and concerned about from the voting rights perspective is not dividing up that Ocotillo concentration in a way that dilutes its voting strength. And then, Ivy, do you want to talk a little bit about the public mapping tools, or do you want me to take that?
Sure.
Go ahead.
We have a number of mapping tools that are available for the public to use so that we can clearly understand your communities of interest or the general districts for the city. In the back of the room today, as you came in, there are paper maps, and it's called the Citizen Participation Kit, and you are more than welcome to draw your lines using a thick marker, hopefully, on that and submit it to council. Along with the paper maps, If you're comfortable with Excel, there is online at the Glendale Redistricting site, there is you will find with these tools in a box that you can check that will bring you to the Excel spreadsheet. And you're more than welcome to use that and do your own calculations. The other tools that we have on the Glendale website for redistricting again are the interactive map. There is an interactive map. And what that means really is that you have the ability to turn on and off various what we call layers, and it will give you both the total population and the socioeconomic data. That again is on the Glendale website. And finally, and there is a link to this on the website as well, there's a mapping tool called District R. And that tool is a very simple, free, online mapping tool. And it is similar to just using a paintbrush. It's extremely user-friendly. And you are more than welcome to use that mapping tool, and then you will be submitting it, and it will make its way to council.
So in addition to your testimony today, we are encouraging and hope to see considerable input as you go home and think about what you hear today and take a look at more information. You're always have these available to use and to submit your thoughts. So that now gets us into the meat of today's presentation, which are the two new draft maps. There are two versions of this. Draft A, it's kind of minimal changes. So Ocotillo stays at 52%, the same Latino percentage as at today. So that's addressing the Voting Rights Act element of this. Cactus is actually close to balanced. So this minimal changes approach makes no changes to Cactus. And then it brings the population deviation, the overall plan, down below 10%. It's still somewhat close to 10% at 8%, a little just over 8%. But that's because we've underpopulated Yucca in anticipation of the faster growth happening in that district than in the rest of the city going forward. And you can see the small changes. These are easier to see if you use the interactive map that I was just talking about. But you can see up here by Grover's Avenue, north of Bell Road, Choya has picked up that corner from Saguaro, and that's what Choya needed to come to population balance. Saguaro has moved south down to Choya Road. Is both squares off the southern end of Saguaro from the current shape and gets the population needs. Saguaro actually gives up a little bit as we're making that nice clean boundary. The very southeastern corner of Saguaro would go to Beryl as we flatten out that corner. And then Beryl would actually come down into what's currently Ocotillo, coming down to Orangewood, only to the east of Grand, not west of Grand. And then Ocotillo actually goes back to close to what its boundary was 10 years ago, crossing 71st to pick up population between Glendale and Bethany Home. So that's kind of making very small changes that balance out each district, actually put Yucca a little bit underpopulated in order to allow for faster growth there, make sure that we can stay in compliance with all the other requirements and bring the plan into population balance. Draft B, the second map we have to show you today, is a little bit larger scale change, slightly different approaches to how we might make the changes. And there's really, it's not that one is better or worse than the other. These are two very different approaches. So we're looking forward to your feedback on these different ideas. First of all, you can see Ocotillo stays the same percentage. So from a Voting Rights Act perspective, both maps are the same and are good. It's a little more closely tied to major roads. You can see that Troya, instead of coming down on both sides, Saguaro actually moves to the west a little bit, south of Union Hills Drive, to pick up that piece of Troya that used to come down. And then Troy, of course, has to pick up population to offset that. So we get a bigger change in Troya, but we end up with a kind of a more compact version of Troya. Similarly, Saguaro comes down, and actually all the way down to Cactus, and touches Cactus, so we clean up that kind of jagged edge that is currently there by actually extending Saguaro farther south, and then it comes down to Desert Cove otherwise. Beryl actually picks up a corner of Cactus, not the mobile home park. That, if you're familiar with the areas we're talking about, the mobile home park stays in Cactus, but the area just north of it would join Beryl and come in there. Cactus is a little overpopulated currently, so it doesn't need to pick up anything to offset that. And then Ocotillo would pick up both the area we showed you in the last map between Glendale and Bethany Home and the area north of Orangewood. It leads to a notch purely because of population balancing. There's too many people in that notch to pick up into Ocotillo. There's fewer people north of Orangewood than there are south of Orangewood, which is why that gets us a little more into Ocotillo. We can't actually pick up that notch area. And then in this case, Ocotillo is underpopulated by 4.46, which is a larger underpopulation, but the overall planned deviation is smaller because we brought Cactus down a little bit. Cactus was overpopulated, and so we took that corner out of it, bringing the overall map closer to balance. One thing that's worth noting is, given the unusual shape of the city, these are all kind of one-off trades. Troya picks up from Saguaro, Saguaro picks up from Beryl, and so on, as you work your way through the city. So it is possible that some of these trades could be interchangeable. So, for example, up north, if you like this border of Troya and Saguaro, but you like the minimal changes map border between Ocotillo and Yucca, well, then those two things can be put together in an alternative map. So that's the kind of thing we're looking for, is your thoughts and feedback and reactions to draft A and draft B, and to hear if you have a preference for one or the other, or some combination of them, and what other changes you'd like to hear about or see to make your preferred map even better. So that's our presentation, and I look forward to your discussion.
Thank you very much, Doug. Appreciate that. We wanted to let you know that we are monitoring our Facebook feed. If you are joining us there, you are watching that, feel free to type in any questions that you have there, and we will ask those questions live during this meeting. You can also feel free to type in any comments that you have there. That's a place where you can also give us feedback. And we're also pleased that there are some audience members with us today. And at this time, I'm wondering, do any of you have questions that you would like to come up and ask? You can raise your hand by a show of hands. Okay, they came live for the presentation. There are no questions. Thank you again for joining us today. We're very glad that you are here. And did we get any further questions via email today?
No, we did not.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Well, if you think of a question after this meeting, we want you to feel free to call the city clerk's office, and the number there is 623-930-2252, option 1. You can also email your questions to redistricting@glendaleaz.com. And again, just a reminder that if you want more information, we have a place you can go. It is our city's website. We have an entire page there that is dedicated to all kinds of information on this topic, including the items that Doug was talking about and Ivy was talking about with the redistricting tool and the maps, and we invite you to go there. We're going to be putting a recording of this meeting on there as well. We're going to be putting our videos that we played earlier on there. You'll be able to, it's a one-stop shop for you for any further information. And again, we just truly appreciate everyone that calls Glendale home to really be part of this process. that wraps up our discussion today. We thank you very much for joining us. We thank our panel members for being here, and we wish you a very good afternoon.